Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Imagine stumbling across $3.2 million buried somewhere in the Arizona desert. Not a fantasy. This fortune may actually exist, hidden for over 150 years beneath the unforgiving landscape west of Wickenburg. But here's the twist. The man who buried it might have been the same person who murdered 6 innocent people to get it. Welcome to one of the American West's most chilling unsolved mysteries, a tale of betrayal, murder, and greed that begins on a dusty November morning in 1871. Picture the Arizona Territory in November 1871. This is raw frontier country where Apache warriors still raid settlements, where justice comes from the barrel of a gun, and where a man can disappear into the vast desert forever. On the morning of November 5th, a stagecoach departed Wickenburg bound for San Bernardino, California. But this wasn't just any ordinary coach. It was carrying what would be worth over $3 million today. Army cashier William Kruger sat inside, responsible for transporting $100,000 in military payroll. Beside him rode Molly Shepard, a former brothel madam who had just sold her Prescott establishment for $40,000, her entire life's work converted to cold, hard cash. The other passengers included Fred Schoholm, a Prescott jeweler, 2 Army civilians named Salmon and Hamill, C.S. Adams, a San Francisco businessman, Frederick Loring, a New York Tribune reporter, and Dutch John Lentz, the experienced driver. None of them would reach California alive except for 2. 9 miles west of Wickenburg, the morning exploded into violence. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, front, rear, and the right side of the coach. When the smoke cleared, 6 people lay dead, their bodies riddled with bullets. The coach itself was completely destroyed, its interior splattered with blood. But here's where this story takes its first suspicious turn. 2 people survived. William Kruger, the man carrying the Army's fortune, and Molly Shepard, the woman with her life savings. Both claimed they had jumped from the coach and hidden in a nearby wash while Apache warriors conducted a savage attack. Kruger boasted that he had single-handedly held off 9 mounted Indian riflemen for hours using only a 6-shooter. General George Crook, commander of all Army troops in Arizona, believed the survivors completely. Most Arizonans did too, conditioned to expect such attacks from local tribes. But Captain Charles Meinhold wasn't buying it. Meinhold, an experienced officer from Fort McDowell, arrived to investigate and immediately noticed problems. The location was completely wrong for an Indian ambush, open country with no cover, no trees, no rocks to hide behind. Any Apache warrior would have chosen a completely different spot. Then there were the horses. Apache raiders always took horses. They were more valuable than gold in this territory. Yet the stagecoach team stood unharmed nearby, apparently ignored by the attackers. The luggage had been opened, but only the money was missing, not the clothing, blankets, or other trade goods that Indians typically prized. Most damning was the testimony of the survivors themselves. Kruger and Shepard gave completely different accounts of the attack. Their stories didn't match on timing, sequence, or crucial details. And Kruger's claim about fighting off 9 mounted riflemen for hours with a 6-shooter? Even sympathetic military officers found that impossible to believe. Captain Meinhold managed to detain both survivors for 2 months at the Date Creek Army Hospital, questioning them repeatedly. With each interview, the inconsistencies grew. His superior, Colonel N.A. Dudley, eventually stated bluntly, "I do not believe there was an Apache near the scene of the murders. But if it wasn't Indians, then who and why?" The answer might lie in the relationship between the two survivors. William Kruger and Molly Shepard weren't strangers. They were known associates in Prescott's underworld. Kruger, as Army cashier, would have known exactly when large payroll shipments were scheduled. Molly, through her brothel business, had connections to every type of criminal element in the territory. Consider the evidence. Both survivors sustained only minor, non-life-threatening wounds, convenient injuries that added credibility without preventing escape. The attackers took only the money and, curiously, the stagecoach shovel. Why a shovel? Because you need something to dig with when you're burying $3 million. Meanwhile, 3 respected newspapers, the San Diego Union, the Los Angeles News, and the Prescott Miner, all published articles claiming they had evidence that the killers were not Indians but rather Mexican bandits, Americans disguised as Indians, or a party or parties unknown. The most chilling theory was the simplest. Kruger and Shepard had orchestrated the entire massacre themselves, killed 6 innocent people, buried the money somewhere in the desert, and planned to return for it later. After their release, both survivors made their way to California, where they became celebrities. The Wickenburg Massacre was front-page news, and the brave survivors were treated as heroes. Kruger took up residence in San Francisco's expensive Barbary Hotel, claiming to live on his investments despite having no apparent source of income beyond his modest Army salary. When reporters later asked about Molly's whereabouts, Kruger shed what witnesses described as a large, quiet tear and claimed she had died in Los Angeles from wounds suffered in the attack. She had requested a quiet funeral, he said, which explained why no one knew about her death. Except there was no record of Molly Shepard dying anywhere in Los Angeles. When San Francisco reporters returned to question Kruger about this discrepancy, they found his hotel room empty. The man had vanished. The mystery deepened in December 1872 when a gunfight erupted in a Phoenix saloon. 2 men died, one of the gunfighters and an innocent bystander. The bystander carried a hotel key and had registered under the name William Kruger of San Francisco. He had told the hotel clerk he was en route to the Wickenburg district for a little prospecting. At a nearby livery stable, investigators found his horse, pack mule, and camping gear, the equipment of a man planning an extended search in the desert. The physical description matched: short, stocky, in his late 30s. If this was the same William Kruger from the massacre, he had returned to the scene of his crime, presumably to recover the buried treasure. But a stray bullet in a random saloon fight had ended his life before he could reveal where $3 million lay hidden in the Arizona desert. And so, the mystery remains. Captain Meinhold was convinced he had identified the real killers, but both died before confessing. The Date Creek Apache, despite having no connection to the crime, were punished a year later in bloody military campaigns, another injustice in a story full of them. The treasure, if the theory is correct, still lies buried somewhere in the hills and arroyos west of Wickenburg. $3.2 million in today's money, waiting for someone with the right combination of research, technology, and luck to uncover it. Modern treasure hunters have searched the area for decades, armed with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. The original Army strongbox, Molly's personal money, and that curious stagecoach shovel could all still be there, preserved in the dry desert climate. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of this story isn't the missing treasure. It's the 6 innocent people who died for it. Fred Schoholm, the jeweler, the 2 Army civilians, businessman Adams, reporter Loring, and driver Dutch John Lentz. Their murders remain officially unsolved, their true killer never brought to justice. The Wickenburg Massacre stands as a stark reminder of how the frontier's isolation and violence could allow the perfect crime. In an era before forensic science, before reliable communication, before modern investigative techniques, a clever criminal with inside knowledge could literally get away with murder. Today, visitors to the area west of Wickenburg can still see the memorial marking where the stagecoach was attacked. The landscape has changed little. The same rocky hills, the same desert washes, the same endless expanse of Arizona wilderness where a fortune in stolen money might lie buried just beneath the surface. The case files remain open, the treasure remains lost, and somewhere in that vast desert the ghosts of 6 murdered travelers wait for justice that may never come. It's a summer afternoon in 1901, and William Fallon is enjoying a peaceful moment in his backyard in Durango, Colorado, when suddenly a snake drops out of the sky. Not literally from the heavens, mind you, but from the branches above, landing with a thud on his roof before slithering into a hole that leads straight into his attic. Now, most people might just let the snake be, but not Fallon. He crawls up into that cramped, dusty attic space, determined to evict his unwelcome guest. What he finds up there changes everything. Not the snake, which remains mysteriously elusive, but hundreds of old newspapers left behind by the previous homeowner, scattered like forgotten secrets across the attic floor. After 30 minutes of fruitless snake hunting, Fallon pauses to catch his breath. That's when his eyes fall upon a yellowed newspaper dated 1860, over 40 years old. The headline makes his blood run cold: a woman's confession to murdering her husband and abandoning his body somewhere in the Colorado wilderness. But it's the next detail that makes Fallon's heart race. The murdered man had discovered an incredibly rich gold vein, worth potentially millions, that vanished with his death. This is the beginning of one of the American West's most enduring treasure mysteries, a tale that spans over 140 years and counting, involving murder, madness, and a fortune in gold that continues to elude every soul brave enough to seek it. The story begins in 1859, when 22-year-old Dora Tucker arrives in Central City, Colorado, with her new husband, George Sire. She's a woman caught between fascination and terror at the vast wilderness surrounding them. George, a skilled printer, quickly finds work with the local newspaper, and for one brief year they build a life together in the booming mining town. But fate has cruel plans. When the couple moves east to Golden for George's new job, tragedy strikes within days. A tavern argument turns deadly, and George Sire bleeds out on the floor, stabbed to death by a stranger. Just like that, Dora becomes a widow in a strange and dangerous land, completely alone. Terrified of facing the frontier wilderness without protection, Dora makes a decision that will haunt her forever. Within a month of George's death, she marries Clem Tucker, a hard rock prospector who promises her security. 2 days after their wedding ceremony, Tucker leads his new bride southwest toward Sheep Mountain, chasing dreams of gold and fortune. What Dora discovers about her new husband makes her previous fears seem like childish nightmares. Tucker doesn't want a wife. He wants a slave. He forces her to maintain their primitive mountain camp while helping him dig for gold in the unforgiving terrain. When exhaustion overtakes her and she dares to complain, Tucker beats her mercilessly, often leaving her unconscious in the dirt. When she begs to return to Golden, he makes his position crystal clear. If she tries to leave, he'll hunt her down and kill her. For weeks, Dora endures this nightmare, trapped in a remote mountain camp with a violent psychopath who sees her as nothing more than property. She's completely isolated, no neighbors, no law enforcement, no hope of rescue. Every sunrise brings fresh terror, every sunset another night of fear. Then Tucker's horse goes missing. As Tucker searches for his strayed animal in a nearby canyon, something catches his eye: an odd glimmer in the rock face beside the trail. Moving closer, he can barely believe what he's seeing. An 8-inch thick vein of quartz, laced throughout with what appears to be almost pure gold. For the next several weeks, Tucker systematically extracts gold from this incredible deposit, returning each day to camp with flour sacks full of precious ore. He shows the glittering treasure to Dora, boasting that his strike could be worth millions. His plan is simple: accumulate enough gold to fund a trip to Denver for proper mining equipment, then return to extract the entire vein. But Tucker has made a fatal miscalculation. Every evening, Dora watches as her husband buries the day's mining profits in a shallow hole just beyond their campfire's glow. She estimates thousands of dollars worth of gold disappearing into that earthen cache night after night. And every evening, after burying his treasure, Tucker crawls into his bedroll and falls into the deep sleep of physical exhaustion. Dora realizes she cannot endure another month of brutality. The thought of Tucker's planned timeline fills her with such despair that even the dangers of the wilderness, becoming lost, encountering hostile Indians, starvation, wild animals, seem preferable to continued abuse. One night, as Tucker sleeps beside his buried fortune, Dora makes her move. She slips quietly from camp, carefully unhobbles one of the horses, and leads it 100 yards away before mounting and disappearing into the darkness. All night long she guides the terrified animal along treacherous mountain trails, jumping at every sound: wind in the trees, bird calls, the scampering of small creatures. By morning she's nearly broken mentally, but her craving for freedom drives her forward. As she reaches the eastern foothills, hope begins to bloom in her chest. Maybe she's actually escaped. Maybe she'll find help among the ranchers and travelers of the plains. Then disaster strikes. Her horse loses a shoe and goes lame. All day, she rides the limping animal until she finds a small spring, where exhaustion finally overwhelms her and she collapses into fitful sleep. Dawn brings her worst nightmare. She awakens to find Tucker standing over her, his face twisted with rage. Before she can move, his fists begin falling and consciousness abandons her once again. When Dora regains awareness around sundown, she pretends to remain unconscious, terrified of triggering another beating. Through half-closed eyes, she watches Tucker make camp for the evening. He's followed her out of the mountains with a pack horse loaded with flour sacks full of gold ore, his entire accumulated fortune. After unloading his precious cargo beside the fire, Tucker sets his rifle against a nearby tree, drinks coffee, and settles into his bedroll. For hours, Dora watches her sleeping tormentor, her mind racing through a maze of desperate thoughts. She knows what awaits her in the morning: another savage beating, probably worse than any before. Tucker will never let her live after this escape attempt. He'll make her death slow and agonizing. The rifle glints in the firelight. Moving with the silence of desperation, Dora creeps toward the weapon. Her trembling hands close around the stock. She positions the muzzle against Tucker's sleeping head and, without hesitation, pulls the trigger. The rifle's report echoes through the wilderness as Tucker's brains explode across the mountain ground. The horses, startled by the gunshot, flee into the night. Dora drops the smoking weapon and begins walking away from the carnage, her mind fragmenting under the weight of what she's done. 3 days later, a band of Ute Indians finds the wandering, traumatized woman and escorts her to Golden. The churchwomen take her in, caring for someone who appears completely broken, shaking, disheveled, babbling incoherently. For 2 months, Dora doesn't speak a single word, leading many to believe she's become mute. Finally, she begins talking to Sarah Gibson, wife of the local newspaper editor. As trust develops, Dora reveals her incredible story: the brutal marriage, Tucker's discovery of the rich gold ledge somewhere on Sheep Mountain, and the murder that freed her. There's just one problem. Dora never actually saw the mine location. Tucker kept his discovery secret even from his wife. Editor Gibson becomes obsessed with the story and organizes a 3-week expedition to find the gold. Using whatever vague directions Dora can provide, the search party combs the Sheep Mountain area, but finds nothing. When they return for more specific information, they discover Dora has descended into complete madness and been committed to an institution. With her destroyed mind goes the last hope of finding Tucker's treasure. The story gradually fades from memory until 1896. Two prospectors heading to Sheep Mountain stop for the night at a small spring about 15 miles from the mountain. Near the water source, they discover human remains and a rusted rifle. The skull shows massive damage from a large caliber weapon. They've unknowingly found Clem Tucker's body, 36 years after the murder. The next morning, one prospector picks up an unusual rock specimen, a piece of gold-filled quartz. They quickly find more pieces, enough to fill a small leather sack. What they don't realize is that Tucker's original flour sacks full of gold have rotted away over the decades, scattering thousands of dollars worth of ore across the ground. The men assume they found only what Tucker carried in his pockets and move on, leaving a fortune behind. This brings us back to William Fallon and his attic discovery in 1901. Reading that 40-year-old newspaper account, Fallon becomes convinced the lost mine exists and spends the next 20 years making periodic trips to Sheep Mountain, searching for Tucker's 8-inch gold vein. He documents every expedition in detailed journals, but never finds the treasure. When Fallon dies in 1931, he passes his obsession to his son George. George Fallon takes up the quest with fresh determination, spending 11 years combing every canyon and outcrop around Sheep Mountain. Like his father, he finds nothing. World War II finally forces him to abandon the search, and once again, the story of the crazy woman's gold fades from memory. But the mountain isn't done with treasure hunters yet. Fast forward to recent times. A pair of hikers returns from Sheep Mountain with half a dozen pieces of glittering, gold-laced quartz they dug from a thin outcrop in a remote canyon. When friends identify the metal as genuine gold, the hikers become excited and plan an immediate return trip. Here's where the story takes on an almost supernatural quality. Despite 2 weeks of intensive searching with modern equipment and GPS technology, they can never relocate that canyon. The gold samples prove the treasure is real, but Sheep Mountain guards its secrets as jealously as ever. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Picture this. It's 1879 in the scorching California desert. A man strikes it rich, discovering what he believes to be one of the most valuable silver deposits in the American West. He's so confident that he boasts about building his family a house with doorknobs and steps made of pure silver, but he refuses to tell anyone where this incredible mine is located. Within months, he's dead, murdered over his secret, and his killer disappears forever. The mine? Still out there, somewhere in the Mojave Desert, waiting to make someone incredibly wealthy. This is the true story of Lee's lost mine, a tale of greed, murder, and political corruption that reads like a Hollywood thriller. The story begins in 1879, when silver fever gripped the American West. In the remote desert between Yucca and Victorville, California, prospector G. Lee made a discovery that would cost him his life. Lee was an experienced miner who had already struck it big, discovering the famous silver deposit at Red Mountain near Barstow. That mine, known as the Pencil Lead Mine, had made Lee wealthy, but not for long. Enter Robert W. Waterman, who would later serve as California's lieutenant governor. Through questionable means, Waterman appropriated Lee's pencil lead mine, leaving the prospector dispossessed and furious. But Lee was far from defeated. He would find an even better mine. Striking out across the harsh Mojave Desert toward Cottonwood Springs, Lee began his search for redemption. The desert was unforgiving, scorching days, freezing nights, scarce water. But Lee knew these lands and what to look for. He had developed an eye for the subtle geological signs that escaped less experienced prospectors. When Lee returned to Barstow, he carried ore samples that would change everything. The silver content was extraordinary. He bragged openly about his discovery, telling anyone who would listen that this new mine would make him wealthy beyond imagination. He would build his family the finest house in California, complete with doorknobs and steps carved from solid silver. But Lee had learned from the pencil lead incident. This time, he would tell absolutely no one where his discovery was located, not friends, family, or business partners. The secret would remain locked in his head alone. However, Lee's secrecy created problems. Mining operations required significant investment, and investors wanted assurance the mine existed. Lee found a partner in Stewart, a crippled assayer from Los Angeles confined to a wheelchair. Stewart had funds and expertise but couldn't visit the remote location. Instead, he insisted Lee take along a trusted friend who could verify the mine's existence. This led to one of the most intriguing episodes in the saga. On a blazing summer day in 1879, Lee and Stewart's representatives set out from Old Woman Springs in a light buckboard. They waited until 3 p.m. to avoid the worst heat, though temperatures still soared over 100 degrees. For nearly 3 hours they traveled slowly across desert terrain, their horses struggling in oppressive heat. As evening approached, Lee called a halt and announced they would camp. While his companions set up shelter, Lee vanished into the desert. For hours, Stewart's friend waited alone, wondering if Lee had abandoned him or met some terrible fate. Then, at 9 p.m., Lee materialized from the darkness carrying ore samples. But Lee's paranoia ruled his actions. Despite Stewart's trust in his representative, Lee refused to display the samples. The message was clear. Stewart could trust his friend, but Lee trusted no one. This pattern continued for months. Lee would disappear into the desert for days, always returning with samples, always refusing to reveal his destination. He had taken residence with a man named Brown on the Mojave River banks, and Brown grew accustomed to Lee's mysterious expeditions. But on one fateful trip, Lee encountered Hans Hoffman waiting at Old Woman Springs. Hoffman was a weathered desert prospector whom Lee recognized as one of Waterman's associates. Lee's suspicions were instantly aroused. Hoffman appeared friendly, offering whiskey and casual conversation. But Lee wasn't fooled. He accepted drinks while remaining cautious, matching Hoffman shot for shot while maintaining his wits. As alcohol flowed, Hoffman's questions became pointed. Where was Lee's mine? How rich were the samples? Would Lee consider additional partners? Lee's responses grew increasingly evasive. He had been down this road with Waterman and the pencil lead mine. No matter how much whiskey Hoffman provided, Lee refused to divulge his mine's location. As Lee's refusal became clear, Hoffman's demeanor changed dramatically. In sudden rage and frustration, Hoffman grabbed a heavy rock and brought it down on Lee's skull with crushing force. The blow killed Lee instantly, silencing forever the only person who knew the location of what might have been the richest silver mine in California. Standing over Lee's body, Hoffman sobered as the magnitude of his actions became clear. Working frantically, he dug a shallow grave and built a fire over it, hoping ashes would disguise the freshly disturbed earth. But fate intervened. As Hoffman worked, 2 horsemen approached the springs. Hoffman's nervous, evasive behavior aroused their suspicions. The horsemen had whiskey and put it to good use, gradually extracting the terrible truth. Hoffman had been paid $500 to either discover Lee's mine location or kill him in the attempt. The source of this blood money was Robert Waterman himself. After Hoffman showed them Lee's burial site and collapsed into drunken stupor, the witnesses raced to San Bernardino to report the murder to Sheriff John Buckhart. But Waterman's network extended far beyond the desert. Word reached Barstow, and Waterman dispatched armed men to help Hoffman escape before the law arrived. The sheriff won the race, arresting Hoffman before Waterman's gunmen could interfere. But Waterman's stake in the trial was enormous. If Hoffman cooperated with prosecutors, Waterman's role could be exposed. Using his wealth and connections, Waterman hired the finest legal representation available. What followed was one of San Bernardino County's longest court battles, stretching from 1880 through 1881. The defense claimed the body wasn't Lee but an Indian woman kicked to death by a horse. But the prosecution had compelling evidence. Lee's dentist identified the deceased's teeth, which he had filled with silver from Lee's own claims. Even more convincing was the victim's height. Lee stood over 6 feet tall, while local Indian women were typically short and compact. Despite this evidence, both trials ended in hung juries, with 11 jurors voting for conviction and 1 holdout. Citizens speculated that Waterman had placed a paid agent on the jury. As the court prepared for a third trial, Waterman's lawyers secured Hoffman's release on $15,000 bail. Hoffman immediately vanished forever. Lee's heirs sued Waterman and won a staggering $300,000 judgment. Even Waterman's own brother sued him over their Pencil Lead mine partnership. Remarkably, despite these scandals, Waterman was elected lieutenant governor, suggesting his questionable ethics were overlooked by California's power brokers. But what about Lee's mine? The secret died with its discoverer, leaving only tantalizing clues. The most significant lies in understanding geography. Today's Old Woman Springs is actually 1 mile east of the original springs where Lee met his fate. The original oasis, named by Colonel Henry Washington in 1855, was later renamed Cottonwood Spring. Rancher Al Swarthout developed new water to the east and appropriated the Old Woman Springs name. This geographic confusion has led treasure hunters astray. Lee's 3-hour buckboard journey should be calculated from present-day Cottonwood Springs, not current Old Woman Springs. This correction significantly changes the potential search area. Modern prospectors focus on areas around known operations like the Blue Ribbon Silver Mine and the old Akron Silver Reef mines. Some suggest Lee's deposit might have contained gold rather than silver, given the Santa Fe and Lester gold mines nearby. Today, the Lucerne Valley attracts rock collectors searching for verde, antique, agate, and jasper. Perhaps one of these modern treasure hunters will stumble upon the secret that neither whiskey nor violence could extract from G. Lee. Somewhere in the vast Mojave Desert, a fortune in precious metals still waits, protected by the silence of a man who preferred death to betrayal. The story of Lee's lost mine remains one of the American West's most compelling unsolved mysteries, where greed, politics, and murder intersected in the unforgiving desert, leaving behind a legend that continues to lure treasure hunters more than 140 years later. The shovel hits something hard in the Nevada dirt. Elder Ezekiel pauses, sweat dripping onto the makeshift grave he's digging for the young Mexican boy whose skull was just crushed by Indian stones. His wife Hannah kneels beside him, both exhausted from the dawn attack that left bodies scattered across their camp. As Ezekiel scrapes away more earth, something glints in the morning sunlight. He reaches down and pulls up a chunk of deep red quartz, shot through with veins of gold that shimmer like a paisley shawl. In this moment of tragedy and terror surrounded by death in the hostile Nevada wilderness, He's just discovered one of the richest gold deposits in American history, a discovery that would launch 1,000 treasure hunts and remain lost to this day. Welcome to another episode where we dive deep into America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Today, we're following the blood-soaked trail of Elder Ezekial, a Mormon pioneer whose tragic journey across Nevada in 1858 or 1859 led to one of the most tantalizing lost treasure stories in the American West. This isn't just another tall tale. Multiple witnesses saw and handled the massive gold specimens Ezekiel found. The evidence is real, the tragedy is documented, but the location? That secret died with him in the Nevada desert. Picture the American West in the late 1850s. The California gold rush has drawn thousands across the continent, but the real story is happening in the stark landscapes between Utah and California. This is where history and legend dance together on the knife's edge of survival, where a single wrong turn means death, and where unimaginable wealth lies hidden beneath the desert floor. The story begins with letters discovered in a wealthy California couple's private archive, written during Nevada's boom camp era to a businessman known as 10C Johnson. Johnson had earned his nickname by revolutionizing Eberhart, Nevada's economy, ending the two-bit era by introducing dimes where quarters had been the smallest coin. But it's what these letters revealed about a Mormon elder that would captivate treasure hunters for generations. Elder Ezekiel's story starts with unanswered questions. In spring 1858 or 1859, this polygamous Mormon patriarch hastily departed his holdings near Lehi, Utah. Why the rush? Some say he was heading to California like thousands of others. Others believe his destination was Genoa, the Mormon station at the Sierra Nevada foothills. The timing coincided with church schisms, suggesting religious persecution drove his flight. Ezekiel wasn't traveling light on courage. His party included wives Hannah and Judith, possibly a third unnamed wife, Emmanuel, a half-grown Mexican apprentice, and Joel, an older employee. They departed in 2 light wagons, well armed with powder and shot, leading quality animals. This was a man who understood the dangers ahead. Their route led past present-day Grantsville into Hell, the notorious salt desert. This journey across the bitter white salt desert could kill within hours if you lost your way. They aimed for a spring below Pilot Peak, north of modern Wendover, the only reliable water source for miles. After grueling days crossing salt flats, Ezekiel's party reached the sweet spring below Pilot Peak. They spent precious days resting and allowing their animals to graze, but the desert's beauty masked its dangers. When they resumed their journey, skirting the salt flats' western edge, they were walking into a trap. On the 3rd day from the springs, just as sunset painted the desert red and gold, the Goshute war party struck. These skilled warriors, armed with bows, lances, and old smoothbore rifles, had identified what they thought was an easy target. They couldn't have been more wrong. What the Goshutes expected to be a simple raid turned into a hornet's nest. Ezekiel's party fought with shocking ferocity. The women proved as deadly as the men, expertly reloading weapons while their husbands picked off attackers with accurate rifle fire. Elder Ezekiel fought like a man possessed, bringing the same fervor to combat that he brought to preaching. But courage couldn't stop every arrow. In the chaos, Judith took an arrow straight through the neck. Death was instantaneous. The Indians were driven off but took several horses. More devastating was the psychological toll. The survivors spent a terrible night listening to every desert sound, expecting another attack that never came. Morning brought the grim task of burying Judith. With no time for proper markers, they wrapped her body in a blanket and dug a shallow grave. For a headstone, they positioned a greenish rock and scratched an epitaph into her pewter plate. Judith, Beeleved, wife of Ezekiel. The plate and cup were buried beneath the stone. Traumatized but determined, the party continued west-southwest, moving slowly and watching constantly for another ambush. They found refuge at a warm spring where they held prayer services and processed their trauma. Days later, they made what seemed like a smart tactical decision, camping on a bench-like flat beneath an overhang with their backs to solid rock. With limited water nearby, it seemed perfect for defense. It was another fatal miscalculation. At dawn, the Gashutes struck again. This attack was wilder and briefer, but no less deadly. A horse's whinny provided crucial warning seconds before the charge. Mormon firearms again proved devastating, and the Indians retreated quickly after heavy casualties. But the attack wasn't over. Just as the party was checking wounds, stones rained down from above. Emmanuel died instantly when a cobble crushed his skull. The stone thrower paid immediately. A lead slug tore through his entrails and he was finished with a gun butt. Joel took a ricocheting arrow in the groin, leaving him unable to help with burial duties. With Joel incapacitated, Elder Ezekiel and Hannah had to dig Emmanuel's grave alone. They chose the nearest soft ground and began the heartbreaking task. It was then, in that moment of grief and exhaustion, that Ezekiel's shovel struck something unusual. The ore that emerged would become legend. Large, beautiful pieces of deep rose quartz, shot through with gold in paisley patterns. Ezekiel immediately recognized the value. Despite limited tools and the pressing need to bury Emmanuel, he collected numerous specimens and loaded them into his saddlebags. Geologists would later suggest this was float, ore washed down from a richer lode higher in the mountains. The implications were staggering. If this was just overflow, what remained at the source? Eventually, the battered party encountered a trader northeast of Austin, in north-central Nevada. By now, they'd been reduced from 2 wagons to traveling hoof and horseback. The gold ore became their currency, traded for essential supplies: flour, lard, sugar, camphor for Joel's wounds, and gunpowder. The trader listened with fascination as Ezekiel recounted their tragic journey and warned about active Indian war parties. Then, loaded with supplies but diminished in numbers, Elder Ezekiel led his surviving party westward into what one chronicler called the mute shadows of time. They were never reliably seen again. Years later, those letters to 10C Johnson surfaced, written by prospectors who'd obtained ore samples and directions from the very trader who dealt with Ezekiel. One described joining 3 other stout fellows, well-armed and mounted, to search for the lode as rich as King Solomon's mine. They had ore pieces and what they believed were accurate directions. Whether those directions proved reliable remains unknown. But the letters confirm that Ezekiel's discovery had become legend almost immediately, drawing other fortune seekers into the Nevada wilderness. Elder Ezekiel's gold isn't just historical curiosity, it's testament to Nevada's incredible mineral wealth. Years after his passage, miners extracted $3 million in silver and gold from a single excavation near Hamilton, measuring just 70 by 40 by 25 feet. The following spring, 2 impoverished prospectors found wealth when they tore down their winter dugout and discovered valuable materials in its construction. Today, treasure hunters still search for Ezekiel's lode. The trail can be pinpointed on both sides of the money country, but the exact discovery route remains unmapped. Enough witnesses saw and handled those distinctive rose quartz chunks with gold paisley patterns to remove any doubt about the bonanza's existence. Somewhere in central Nevada's mountains, incredibly rich gold ore still waits to be rediscovered. Elder Ezekiel found it during profound tragedy, while burying a young man whose life was cut short by frontier violence. The ore samples he collected were real. Too many witnesses saw them for doubt to remain, but the secret location died with him in the Nevada desert. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest Gold story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Happy trails! Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.